G'day, I'm Pete, the Aussie Bush Cop. In 2012 I retired from the New South Wales Police and moved to beautiful King Island, where I became a homesteader. And I'd like to share with you stories of crime and criminals from the New South Wales bush. G'day everyone, thanks for joining me again. I just wanted to say before I shared this week's story that one of the reasons I'm doing these podcasts is to raise awareness of what police actually go through on an everyday basis. As you might know, I was a General Duties Senior Constable, which meant, you're more or less in the thick of it. You're on the front line. We were General Duties Police were the first to almost any job, whether it's a noise complaint or a murder. But what I'm doing in telling you these stories, or I want to make that clear, is that these stories are not unique to me. These stories that I'm sharing with you, whilst the particular stories are of course unique to me, the calibre of them is very much what all General Duties Police go to. And just in case you're not sort of aware of it, you probably are, but all police start off as General Duties Police. In New South Wales at least, it's generally the rule of thumb that you do 3 years of General Duties policing before you go and branch off into something, whether it's detectives or highway patrol or the like. There is, especially in an organisation as big as the New South Wales Police, which ranks very, very large in the English-speaking world. The New South Wales Police is one of the biggest in the world, whereas there's about 15,000 members. So there's a job more or less for everybody, no matter what your likes or dislikes or skills or whatever. But I just want to make sure or make it plain that I'm just telling stories that are very typical of I would say all police, whether they're in the guts of Sydney or they're out in the back blocks of New South Wales like I was. With that aside, the story I got for you today is about a break and enter. A break and enter is an offence which is dealt with by police, by General Duties Police, and it is of course, sadly, a very common offence, and that was the bulk of crimes that General Duties Police deal with is what's called high volume but less serious crime. But of course, if that crime happens to you, then it's serious, and I always treated that seriously. The offence of break and enter, some might call it burglary, whatever you want to call it, wherever you're from, has, in New South Wales at least, a very low clear-up rate. And the last figure I heard was about 5%. Now, I have a number of stories that I'll share with you about successful investigations I did into break and enter offences. And the one I'll share with you today is not just a simple break and enter, was an aggravated break and enter. Now, legally speaking, aggravated means there are certain circumstances which make it aggravated. And the one, some of them are, they're generally called home invasion. Like if you're home and someone breaks into your home, that's called a home invasion, but that's more or less what they call it on TV. It's called an aggravated break and enter, and there are a number of circumstances that make it aggravated, and that's one of them. Another one is that simply more than one person breaks into the house, irregardless of whether there's anyone home or not. And the story that I'm going to share with you is about an aggravated break and enter. And it happened in a small country town. It was a Sunday morning when I was working and we were called to this particularly small country town by the victim, and the location was hitherto it was an old hotel or a pub that had accommodation in it. The licensing part of it was not operating anymore, but it was owned privately, and a bloke was just leasing out the rooms in there for accommodation, like long-term accommodation. Anyway, he went there on this particular Sunday morning and his premises had been broken into. So he called us. So we went down there and there was blood at the point of entry, which was a glass door. There was blood, and the blood, well, you know, you'd have to safely say, came from one of the people that broke in. And when they broke in, they just made a hell of a mess. They didn't actually steal anything, they just more or less vandalised the place. So, and there was quite a bit of blood there. So I then went up to the local hospital and asked, I'm guessing it was a nurse, and said to her, you didn't have anyone come in overnight with an injury, that you know, like a laceration type injury? And she said, yes, we did. And I said, well, could you tell me who that is? And so she gave me a name and an address. So I went round to this address, knocked on the door, and there was a long hallway leading up to the front door. And I remember there was only a fly screen door that was shut. The main door was open. So I knocked on the door, and a bloke in his 20s walks up to the door with a heavily bandaged forearm. And I said to him, mate, I think you might be the one we need to speak to. So I put the allegation to him, and based on the DNA evidence that we were going to gather from the scene, he confessed to the crime. We took him to the police station, properly interviewed him, and he confessed to the crime. I also gathered other statements from two different places, two different sources, who saw a knot of men getting around together that prior evening. They were seen at a licensed premises, and then they were seen just walking along one of the streets in this town. And so I knew that there was more than one person involved. So he then came on board and provided me with a statement about who the other co-offenders were. And how this happens, all this is done, you might hear in the news, police did a deal. And I guess in a sense that's correct. And the deal, because it was an aggravated break and enter, which means that potentially it's going to end up before a district court judge, and it carries a very significant penalty, like in the order of more than 20 years at the very top. And so the Department of Public Prosecutions are the ones that run the prosecution, as opposed to a police prosecutor in the local court. Anyway, so the DPP was almost immediately involved, and they did a deal with this offender. And the deal was that he's dealt with by the court, he's convicted, and he's sentenced. Sentence can mean, of course, just a bond or a monetary fine, and I don't remember what any of these blokes got. But his matter is finalised. But it's finalised on the basis that he will give evidence, if necessary, against the co-offenders. And he can't back out of it. Well, he can, but there's consequences. If he was then required to go to court and give evidence against the co-offenders, and then just said, no, I'm not going to give that evidence, then the deal includes the possibility, or the very real possibility, that he'll be put back before the court and re-sentenced, like that original sentence rescinded, and then sentenced as if he hasn't cooperated. So, to put it in the normal parlance, we had him over a barrel, and that's what happened. So, I then tried to make contact with these co-offenders, mostly or initially that was by phone. And I remember ringing one of the offenders' phone, or somehow or other I ended up speaking to, they're all adults, but I remember speaking to one of the offenders' fathers on the phone, and he was, might say, a little bit offhand, a bit dismissive of me. And I said, mate, I can tell you that this offence is a very serious offence, and it's in his interest, your son's interest, to contact me urgently. And I told him a little bit about the possible penalties that come with it. And he and I know that that was just unlikely, but nonetheless, it was a weighty matter. And I know that very soon after that, his son, this particular offender, presented himself at the police station where I was, and he was dealt with. So that's, and then, you know, there was 4 offenders all up, so the other 2 offenders were subsequently rounded up and charged, and they all entered pleas of guilty. I dare say that the friendship between the first offender and the others didn't go as well. But when my experience of people, unless they're extremely grounded in some almost immutable belief, they will give up offenders when it means preserving themselves. It's just the reality of life. It's one of the very few times, we all know, well, if you've been in the police, you know that it's a pretty thankless task. And this is one of the very few occasions where I was actually commended or given a letter of thanks by the victim, because just to get a conviction, to find the people that did it and have them convicted, with all without too much fuss, meaning there was no hearings, there was no trial, they all just pled guilty and were subsequently dealt with. And, you know, maybe that sounds a bit hard. I don't know what you might think about that. It sounds a bit hard. But in my view of doing this to these young men was that it may well stop them from a life of crime. Now, that may well sound naive, but I'm not naive. And I think that often, or at least sometimes happened, that they hit the dock, is the expression that police use, and they may well have never offended again. And hopefully that was the case. Anyway, that was a story, one of my stories about successful inquiries into a break and enter offence, and there'll be a few more of them to come. Thanks for listening, and I hope your chooks are still laying. See ya.